Order. Luke Akehurst to move the motion.
I beg to move that this House has considered UK air and missile defences. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr Dowd. I'm pleased to have secured this debate today to highlight what I believe to be a critical weakness in our national defences. I'm sure it will come as no surprise to honourable members here today that I say this, but I sincerely believe that outside of this place, even amongst many of our colleagues, it is not appreciated that the diversity of the threat we now face from air attack and the lack of our defences against it is at its most serious in decades. It's worth saying from the outset that this debate is about defences against conventional air and missile threats, not nuclear. That is, of course, why we maintain our continuous at sea strategic nuclear deterrent. The world is more unstable today than at any point since the Cold War. But sadly, despite a changing threat environment, I fear our defences have not been adapted quickly enough to deter or protect against it. The House of Lords International Relations and Defence Committee's report, published in September, which analysed the lessons we can learn from Ukraine, laid out in stark terms the significant weaknesses in European defences. Key amongst them is that our air and missile defences are, quite frankly, inadequate. Russia's invasion of Ukraine not only brought conventional warfare back to mainland Europe, but has shown in stark terms the importance of credible and robust air and missile defences. Nearly 12,000 missiles have been launched against Ukraine by Russia since February 2022. Around 80% of them have been intercepted thanks to different air defence systems protecting military and civilian infrastructure. But that still means thousands of missiles have impacted, often to devastating effect. Over the course of just 1 week earlier this month, Russia used more than 800 guided aerial bombs, around 460 attack drones, and more than 20 missiles of various types against Ukraine. During the Cold War, NATO's air defences were a largely static system, arrayed in belts around a unidirectional and well-defined threat of manned aircraft from the Soviet Union. But today's environment is less predictable. The range of air and missile threats is larger, and the threat could come from any direction. Indeed, according to reports from earlier this year, NATO states are able to provide less than 5% of the air defence capacity deemed necessary to protect allies in Central and Eastern Europe against a full-scale attack. Unlike Ukraine, the UK has some obvious geographical protection from attacks by ground-based short-range missiles and drones. But two significant and concerning reports over recent days show once again that there is no cause for complacency. Firstly, that Russia is now prepared to use intermediate-range hypersonic ballistic missiles against targets in Ukraine. This is the first successful use of this type of missile with conventional warheads in combat. They are harder to intercept and represent a significant escalation. The second concerning report in recent days relates to the presence of unidentified UAVs around 3 RAF bases, Lakenheath, Mildenhall and Feltwell, between the 20th and the 22nd of November, and again overnight on the 25th of November. I do not expect the Minister to go into too much detail about this recent incident or what countermeasures are currently in place at our bases, but both of these reports serve to show that short-range and long-range threats to the UK are very real, very diverse, and we need to be able to defend ourselves against them. If we look at events in the Middle East, we can also see the diversity of short to long-range aerial threats. Israel has faced rocket, drone and ballistic missile attacks from Iran and its proxies in Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen and Syria. In October, Iran launched almost 200 ballistic missiles against Israel following its previous attack involving 300 missiles and drones in April. But unlike the UK, Israel has a sophisticated and multi-layered air and missile defence system to counter these wide-ranging aerial threats. The Iron Dome intercepts short-range rockets of the type fired by Hamas and Hezbollah. David's Sling can intercept medium to long-range rockets as well as ballistic and cruise missiles. Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 can intercept long-range ballistic missiles. And recently we saw the deployment of US THAAD batteries to bolster defences against ballistic missile threats. The UK's current air defence capabilities against such threats are primarily made up of Sea Viper on Type 45 destroyers utilising Aster missiles, Sky Sabre ground-based air defence, and Quick Reaction Alert Typhoon fighter jets. Typhoons on Quick Reaction Alert at Coningsby and Lossiemouth can intercept potential hostile airborne threats, including aircraft and UAVs. The Sky Sabre ground-based air defence system can intercept multiple cruise missiles, aircraft and UAVs up to 25 kilometres away. However, there are only around 6 Sky Sabre systems in service with the British Army, and at least 2 are deployed overseas to the Falkland Islands and Poland. Clearly, many more of these systems would be needed in order to provide sufficient cover to a larger number of critical military and civilian national infrastructure sites across the UK. I know that the business case for more Sky Sabre launchers has been approved, but orders have not yet been made. And bizarrely, no business case has been made to order more missiles for Sky Sabre, despite potential orders for these taking longer to fulfil. Crucially, though, Sky Sabre cannot defend against ballistic missile or hypersonic missile threats. It was not designed to do so. The only defence the UK currently has against ballistic missiles is Sea Viper, which utilises Aster 30 missiles on our 6 Type 45 destroyers. Sea Viper can currently track potential threats at ranges up to 250 miles and eliminate them within around 70 miles. I know that Sea Viper is being upgraded over the next decade with initial operating capability in 2028. And this is very welcome. But with only a few Type 45s in service at any one time, the coverage they can provide in defence of homeland targets against ballistic missile threats is limited. To defend London against ballistic missile threats, a Type 45 destroyer would have to be permanently moored in the Thames estuary. That would mean it could not do anything else. In particular, it would be unavailable for its primary role of protecting one of our aircraft carriers from air and missile threats. I think this alone makes the case that some form of new or upgraded ground-based air defence system, which provides protection against threats, including ballistic and hypersonic missiles, is needed. If we only consider military critical national infrastructure that would be vulnerable to air attack and would need adequate protection, we have the 3 main Royal Navy operating bases at Portsmouth, Devonport and Clyde, 7 RAF bases, including Lossiemouth, Marham and Coningsby, the major army garrisons, radar sites, ammunition depots, as well as sites overseas, including the sovereign base areas of Akrotiri and Dekalia in Cyprus, which are within range of Iranian ballistic missiles, unlike sites in the UK. Major defence industrial sites would also presumably be at risk. Then there is a plethora of civilian infrastructure of significance which could be targeted, including nuclear power stations, large transport hubs, industrial sites and government buildings. And we know tragically from the war in Ukraine that Russia has no compunction about hitting civilian targets such as hospitals, shopping centres or concentrations of housing purely to terrorise the civilian population and degrade national morale. The last government's integrated and defence reviews slowly started to acknowledge the threat from air attack, with the 2023 Defence Command paper describing the threat as being at its, quotes, most acute for over 30 years. But clearly, the resources have not yet been put into upscaling equipment and filling the gaps in capability that we need to counter this. Other European countries have been taking this seriously and placing orders. In the past decade, France and Italy have jointly developed the medium-range SAMP/T air defence system, which can intercept ballistic missiles, drones, fighter jets and other targets. In September, France ordered 8 new SAMP/T NG systems capable of intercepting hypersonic missiles, with the first ones to enter service in 2026. Italy also ordered 10 of these new systems, which will utilise upgraded Aster 30 missiles. Many European countries already utilise the American Patriot air defence system. To bolster this, existing operators Germany, the Netherlands, Romania, Spain and Sweden are procuring 1,000 additional Patriot missiles between them. Poland has signed contracts worth £4 billion with UK industry to deliver its Naru next-generation air defence system. Belgium, Cyprus, Estonia, France and Hungary are jointly buying around 1,500 Mistral short-range air defence SHORAD missiles. Latvia and Estonia are jointly procuring IRIS-T for medium-range interception, and Finland has ordered the David Sling system. To fill capability gaps and to ensure interoperability, we should be working with our European NATO partners on joint procurement. I know the government has previously said that the UK is engaging with the European Sky Shield initiative, which seeks to establish a ground-based, integrated European air defence system with anti-ballistic missile capability. But there are clearly different views across Europe about which systems this should be comprised of, to not only ensure interoperability, but also to develop and maintain Europe's defence industrial base. I'm aware the UK signed a letter of intent to launch the Integrated Air and Missile Diamond initiative in October, alongside 6 allies: France, Germany, Latvia, Norway, Poland and Sweden. This is clearly welcome, as it shows the seriousness with which the threat is recognised, but there is no clear timetable or key milestones associated with the Diamond initiative. I would be grateful if the Minister could provide an update on this. It's not just our ability to take down hostile airborne threats that we have to consider, it's also our ability to detect them in the first place. It is no secret that we only have a limited number of fixed and mobile land-based radars on UK soil, which would probably be amongst the first targets vulnerable to air attack. The last government's early retirement of E3 Sentry left a capability gap in airborne early warning and control, which has only been compounded by delays in the E7 Wedgetail programme. Airborne early warning and control will be crucial in monitoring the western and southwestern coasts of the UK, where ground-based radar is limited, to detect potential submarine-launched threats. We also need to take seriously the potential for radar evasion along the east coast, particularly by UAVs or projectiles passing through wind farms. I know that deconflicting wind farms and existing air defence surveillance systems is something the government is actively working on. I would be grateful if the Minister could speak briefly about this. I know ministers will already be acutely aware of everything I've said to open this debate today, but as I said at the start, I do not think many of our colleagues, including across government outside the MOD, appreciate the scale or the seriousness of this issue. The defence analyst Francis Tusa has compared the current situation with that found by General Frederick Pyle in 1937, when he was appointed commander of the 1st Anti-Aircraft Division. General Pyle highlighted the severe lack of anti-aircraft batteries to defend civilian and military locations, and his analysis led to an increase in personnel in anti-aircraft roles and the mass production of anti-aircraft artillery. Our armed forces are amongst the best and most capable in the world, but unfortunately, the defence they can provide today against significant airborne threats to the homeland, such as missile attack, is very limited. We have highly capable equipment, but not enough of it to protect the significant amount of critical infrastructure across the length and breadth of the country, and also to defend troops deployed on operations overseas. Principally, that is because we spent most of the last few decades focused on expeditionary overseas missions rather than active homeland defence, and we've been too slow to adapt to the changing threat picture. The lack of active homeland defence is fundamentally a strategic failure, and I hope the ongoing strategic defence review will deem it as such and outline how it can be urgently addressed. The first responsibility of our government is to protect our people and defend our freedom. I fear that further delay in outlining the action we are going to take, and crucially the budget to deliver it, brings only greater risk of catastrophic failure in fulfilling this fundamental responsibility. Addressing this capability gap needs to be an urgent political, funding and industrial priority for government. I hope the Minister will feel that this debate helps her demonstrate the political support in Parliament for tackling it.
Thank you. Can I remind members that if they should bob if they wish to be called in the debate. The question is that this House has considered UK air and missile defences. Jim Shannon.
Chairman, thank you so much for calling me, and a pleasure to serve under your chairship. It seems like only a few minutes ago you and I were in Westminster Hall yesterday afternoon. You finished the 4:31, and as I did as well, and we moved on. Here we are, within minutes it seems that we're back again, you know. But
Again.
Can I first of all congratulate the honourable member for North Durham for bringing this to the Chamber. I spoke to him last week in the Chamber when I was aware that he had the debate, and I congratulate him on achieving it, and he's so right to bring this debate to Westminster Hall for consideration. And I think it's important that we recognise the importance of the UK air and missile defences, but also the importance of us in this Parliament collectively, all together, making a very clear pledge to them as well. So again, congratulations to the honourable gentleman on bringing it forward. As we are all aware, and as the Ukraine conflict in tandem with the sustained attacks on Israel have illustrated in a way which none of us wants to see but becomes a reality, the need for a strong and robust air defence. I think, and just to say in passing in relation to Israel, it is hopefully good news that we recognise there's a 60-day suspension coming in relation to the attacks by Hezbollah against Israel, and there seems to be some peace agreement. We hope that will stand firm, and we hope that it can last for 60 days and possibly last longer. As members may be aware, the UK and perhaps the world-leading air defence company Thales is in the neighbouring constituency of mine, the constituency of the honourable member for East Belfast. He tells me that most of the constituents, the majority of the constituents, the workers in the factory are my constituents. So we have, obviously, I'm his neighbour constituency, and I recognise the importance of Thales for that. So I'm thankful for this good local employer, not simply for providing skillful, gainful employment at a very decent wage. They also do something incredibly helpful as well, Mr Chairman, and that's apprenticeships. Whenever the honourable member for East Belfast and I met them back in August time, one of the things we pushed for was apprenticeships, and we were very, very pleased that they were doing that constructively. And by the way, just those who gain an apprenticeship, their fees are paid for them from their students as well. So the things that they do, they want to retain those apprentices for the long term. So there's some good things coming from that. It's always good to recognise that that can happen. The apprenticeships for young people, indeed seeing their work be granted, the worker who happens to be my constituent has been granted the Northern Ireland Apprentice of the Year award, I think is an indication of how much they do for the apprentices. The use of local suppliers means that more employed on-site have their employment due to their innovation and to their excellence. The design and production of air defence capabilities by Thales in Northern Ireland directly employs more than 800 people and contributes some 81 million to Northern Ireland's GDP. I'm very pleased, Mr Chairman, to see the Minister in her place, and I look forward to her support for our requests and for long term. Also a pleasure to see the Shadow Minister in his place, who I know has made numerous visits to Northern Ireland. Indeed, he probably will comment on that when he's on his feet. And we appreciate his commitment that there was in the past and still is today. However, my gratitude extends to Thales and them for their security that the products offer our entire nation as we ensure that we can withstand warfare should it be necessary. I think when we look back to the start of the Ukraine crisis and the fact that Thales were able to supply the shoulder-held weapons that slowed down the advance of Russian armies right across the whole front, that was Thales in Belfast, part of this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, doing their job for liberty and freedom and democracy. I was therefore very pleased to learn some few months ago that Thales had secured the £176 million MOD contract to produce lightweight missiles for the British Army. The order will equip current and future short-range air defence capabilities for the Army, such as Stormer combat vehicles, and be fired by the Royal Navy's maritime anti-surface missile system deployed from the Wildcat helicopters that the honourable gentleman in his introduction referred to as well. That's coming from us in Thales, in Belfast, in this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Weighing only 13 kilos each, the Ministry of Defence said the LMMs provide a solution against threats such as drones, as helicopters, other aircraft and small, fast maritime targets. These missiles have been used in Ukraine to aid our allies in their ongoing struggle, and these have truly made a difference. It is right and proper that we ensure that we have a decent supply of stock and the facility and the capacity to quickly access more should the need arise. So I'm happy to give way.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. Would he agree with me that as he elaborates on the stock that we would require, hopefully never need to be used, but we most definitely require it, that it would help if the current government were to outline in more clear detail how quickly we will get to 2.5% in terms of defence spending?
Yeah, I thank my honourable friend and colleague for that intervention. And again, I know the Minister assiduous in her work that she does will no doubt be taking a note of that, or our officials will, and they'll be passing forward the information up to date where we are. I want to comment on that later on as well, because I think it's really, really important that we look forward. It is my hope, and I know it is a shared hope with those in this room, that we can shortly find a way forward to peace. Peace for Israel, peace for Ukraine, peace in Africa, peace in so many theatres of war. And I say this in my church 2 weeks ago. The pastor of the Baptist church that I attend, he in his prayers he referred to there's 47 wars in the world. That's how many there is. You may not, they're the ones that feature highly Ukraine and Israel, of course, but across this world there's wars and rumours of wars. 47 wars gives an indication of why peace is so important. But whilst we hope and aim and strive for peace, we must be prepared for war as well. We must ensure that our armed forces are equipped and trained on land and sea and air, as well as the new cyberspace, and missiles are a part of the preparedness that we must ensure we have secured. The UK Minister of Defence has to prepare for Russian aggression. I was in the paper this morning. The honourable gentleman from North Durham referred to it, where the Russian drones were looking at the east of England, and I understand that the MOD, Mr. Chairman, was responding to address those drone issues. I know it's a hot story, if that's the way to put it. If it's hot, I was in the paper for the first time this morning, but maybe the Minister might be able to give us some indication on how we are getting ourselves prepared and ready for any such excursions by Russian forces, whatever they may be, in the east of England, and indeed even through the Republic of Ireland into Northern Ireland and ultimately towards the United Kingdom. I would love to have a special NATO relationship with the Republic of Ireland, but we must be aware that that is a back door to Britain, and therefore we need to be prepared and ready. And so it's important that we're doing what we can. I welcome the news that we were again to increase our GDP. Our mum, friend for East London Derry, referred to that. And I know that the issue of the 2.5% is something that the Minister, we all want the Minister to do that and government to do that. There's nobody has any differential in that, and perhaps maybe how that can be achieved. And secondly, just quickly, what discussions have taken place with our NATO fellow countries and compatriots in the battle in relation to their preparedness to spend 2.5% for a similar reason. I'm very conscious that within NATO we have our commitment to Latvia, Lithuania, to Estonia, to Poland, who are in the front line with Russia, and they have stood firm, and how we can ensure that their commitment is likewise to the 2.5%. And those who aren't in the front line, who perhaps may think they're safe because they're way behind those countries, how they can commit themselves to that 2.5%. And I think that's something I would very much like to see. Obviously, we've got a change of administration in the United States. President Trump-elect will take over in January 21st, I think it is. President Biden's still there until that time. Again, has there been any discussions with the incoming president in relation to commitment? If there hasn't been, maybe some indication from the Minister, perhaps when that might take place. I conclude with this comment, Mr. Chairman. I welcome the news that we are again to increase our GDP on military spend, and this is right and proper. However, the continued production of high-level defence capacity by Thales and by others, UK providers, must be continued in order to ensure that we can not only help those of our allies in need, but so that we can ensure that anyone who would position themselves as our enemy knows that our calmness and our kindness is certainly not weakness. This great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I'm proud to be a member of it. I'm very proud to stand as a honourable member for Strangford and ensure that we collectively in this House add our support to all of those. I support the creation of these necessary arms and thank those who are ensuring that we have the capacity to continue to be and have the very best armed forces that there are in this world. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin Bonavere.
Thank you, Mr Dowd. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. I'd also like to thank my honourable friend, the member for North Durham, for obtaining the chance to debate this vital matter today. I'd like to commend him on his comprehensive diagnosis of the threats we face today. He is right when he says we have entered a period of global instability not seen since the Cold War era. Firstly, Putin's brutal and illegal invasion of Ukraine, where the threat continues to escalate and the damage continues to spread. We must answer Russia with a European, transatlantic and UK-based response that adapts to the evolving threats of warfare, be that through technology, on land, in the sea, in the air and in space. I'm proud that my constituency of Stevenage plays an integral part in the UK's response to Putin as the place where Storm Shadow missiles are being refitted for use by Ukraine. Then the ongoing instability in the Middle East, with the risk of an escalation to an all-out regional conflict that will implicate allies around the world. We must too assess our preparation for the vastly different challenges ongoing chaos in the region will cause. But regardless of conflict and the differing threats posed, it's clear that NATO, Europe and the UK are not where we need to be to confidently say we can protect our interests at home and abroad. On air defence alone, NATO states can provide less than 5% of the air defence capacity needed to protect Europe from a larger attack. This matter is of deep importance to me and my constituents in Stevenage. As an ex-local armed forces champion, I'm proud to represent a constituency where MBDA, who produce Sea Sceptre and Sea Viper, are based. The capability of Sea Sceptre and Sea Viper, which bolster our naval-based air and missile defence capability, are integral to the UK's current missile defence strategy, in both protecting our ground-based assets at home and our blue water naval capability wherever they may be deployed across the world. Primes and Stevenage, like Airbus, also support our thriving SME sector in the UK, one of which supplies MBDA with thermal batteries that allow their missiles to sit dormant under pressure before going off quickly when activated. We must not play down the role our industry partners play in our air defence, because without the ingenuity of industry like those in Stevenage, we would not be able to continue to maintain or indeed scale up our missile response. It's this proud international role my town plays in the defence sector that inspired me to take up a role as part of the UK delegation at the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, where for the past week I've been at the NATO summit in Montreal with international partners discussing these exact issues. The consensus across NATO is clear. Growing threats lead to growing strength, faster evolution and a more unified response than ever. Yes, I have to give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and it's clear that war in Europe, war within our continent, has fundamentally shifted defence priorities and key areas for focus. Does my honourable friend agree with the Chief of Defence Staff's recent comments that a key area for future investment should be integrated air missile defence to better address the growing global challenges and threats?
Yeah.
I thank my honourable friend, the chair of the Select Committee of Defence. I absolutely agree with him. We have to now have interoperability across all our services, and that not just in land, sea, and in the air, but also space, which I think is not just the next frontier, but that brings it all together, and we must not forget that. And yeah, currently here in this country, the UK is meeting the NATO requirement of 2% of GDP contribution, alongside 22 other NATO allies. But this Labour government, I'm pleased, has a commitment to increase that to 2.5% following the Strategic Defence Review. In undertaking that review, the Department will be looking at the many ways in which we can develop strength where we are weak and efficiency where we are slow. And develop strength we must. It is integral that the UK bolster our air and missile defence capability, especially as we saw only last week with Putin's first use of intermediate-range hypersonic missiles in Ukraine. We must make sure that our constituents and the infrastructure they rely on are protected from missile attack, and the threat of these types of attacks will keep on rising for the foreseeable future. I believe that the only way we can upscale our capability effectively is by working with both our strategic partners in NATO and our geographically closest partners in Europe. I want to urge the Minister to explore the viability of a defence and security pact with the EU and across Europe. As a third partner currently, we run the risk of not just the UK being locked out of discussions with our counterparts across Europe, but also our industry. We must work to supercharge our UK-based defence industry and give them the correct tools to work hand in hand with our European partners to keep us all safe. If this does not happen, then we will not be effectively maximising our own capability for our defence and our wider response to the war in Ukraine and increasing uncertainty internationally. I would make this case to the Minister. Keep spending, bolster our armed forces, do everything in our power to retain sovereign capability over every area of the sector, from manufacturing to procurement. Speed up production and explore every avenue to developing the technologies and systems we need to face down modern threats and tackle global challenges. At the very heart of this all, prioritise the UK's missile defence capabilities so that companies like MBDA and Airbus in my constituency can contribute in an ever bigger and better way than they already are. I want to urge the Minister to explore the viability of a defence and security pact with the EU and the wider Europe, which includes an industrial pact for UK-EU collaboration in weaponry to guarantee our safety and stability while we navigate our evolving relationship with our close allies in the US. To conclude, the rules-based order across the world is under the greatest threat since the end of the Second World War. The UK has been at the very heart of creating that rules-based order. We must do all we can to protect it, so boosting our own defences is now critical. Thank you.
Thank you. Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologise for my late arrival. Two of the air bases recently targeted by drones, Lakenheath and Mildenhall, are in my constituency of West Suffolk. And residents were concerned to hear the aircraft being scrambled in the middle of the night as they flew to intercept them at the weekend. So I'd be grateful if, when the Minister responds later, she could give us a clear account of what happened and what the response is likely to be if this continues. And in particular, I want to raise a related security concern. The Director General of MI5 recently said that we now face state-backed sabotage, and we should expect to see continued Russian acts of aggression here at home. They are, quote, on a mission to generate mayhem on British and European streets. We've seen arson, sabotage, and more. So this is obviously a serious threat to our country. Now, I don't expect the Minister or other honourable members present today to know the details of the proposed Sunnica solar and battery farm, which is very close to both Lakenheath and Mildenhall. And many of the service personnel who work at the bases live even nearer to the proposed site. But at that site, the proposal includes battery energy storage systems that are especially vulnerable to acts of sabotage. Best fires on similar sites have been caused by lithium battery failure, leading to thermal runaway. This can cause explosions, and the resulting fires cannot be extinguished using conventional methods. 4 years ago, a fire at a Best site in Liverpool took 59 hours to put out, and similar stories apply elsewhere around the world where these facilities have been constructed. The fires emit toxic fumes, which means that people in the vicinity must remain indoors throughout. So I think the risk to the sites, given the location of the Sunnica solar farm, is quite obvious. So I don't expect a full answer from the Minister today, but what I would ask is maybe in her concluding remarks, if she could commit to having a meeting with me and maybe some of her officials, we could talk privately about that. I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Brickell.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Mr Dowd, and I must declare an interest here as the Member of Parliament for Bolton West, the home of MBDA's Logistics North production site. I would also like to congratulate my honourable friend, the Member for North Durham, for securing this important debate, and I particularly welcome his comments on lessons to be learnt from Ukraine and also about ensuring our armed forces are able to protect us from a diverse range of threats. All of us will have constituents who are concerned about last week's developments between Russia and Ukraine, including President Putin's use of an advanced hypersonic missile. I would like to say that this is a personal issue for me. My own father, indeed, was stationed in Germany throughout the 1970s as the threat of nuclear war with the Soviet Union loomed, and the shadow cast by that period of constant existential fear is, unfortunately, a long one. Indeed, the terrifying reality is that war isn't just something we read about in newspapers now, it is on our doorstep, but we aren't fighting on the beaches, the landing grounds, the fields and the streets anymore. The long-distance missile capabilities of hostile states mean, regrettably, that war can now reach us in our own homes. And all that is to say is that sovereign capability for missile defences here in the UK has seldom been so important. Indeed, as others have already noted, we are vulnerable to advanced missiles like the one fired by Russia last week and by Iran on Israel earlier on in the year. And as our armed forces and defence infrastructure were left to crumble during the last 14 years, a serious capability gap has emerged, particularly around defence against air threats and our ability to engage targets at extended range. Only in September, the House of Lords International Relations and Defence Committee warned that the government must, and I quote, pay greater attention to homeland defence, particularly integrated air and missile defence in closer collaboration with European allies. I know... Yes, I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend, and he's making an excellent speech. It's increasingly clear that enhanced cooperation with NATO and other allies will be essential in achieving defence aims in the UK with regards to air and missile defence. Does my honourable friend agree that, like we've seen with the recent Estonia Pact, these continued alliances will not only enhance our ability to meet procurement challenges, but they will also ensure that we are able to defend against these long-range missile threats?
I agree with my honourable friend, and I will come on to that in the context of the recent Germany-UK defence agreement, which was signed in Trinity House only last month. Over the weekend, we also saw an intervention from former Defence Minister and former Chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood, who said that we are woefully unprotected and described London, and I quote, as almost a sitting duck. This is an issue I know which can garner support from across all sides of the House. And indeed, I know that other members of this House recognise the scale of the challenges ahead, which necessitate ever closer international relationships and collective defence within NATO and the European Union. And with that in mind, I had the immense pleasure of talking to German counterparts as part of a delegation to Berlin in September, and as the Secretary of the APP on Germany, enthusiastically welcomed last month's UK-Germany Trinity House Agreement on Defence. This government's shared objective with Germany to sustain effective deterrence against would-be aggressors by building credible, resilient defence forces and defence industries is vital if we are to work towards the vision of a peaceful and stable Europe and North Atlantic. Sovereign capability as an enduring necessity is something I expect the government's forthcoming strategic defence review will attest to. Indeed, in order to ensure adequate manufacturing capacity, industry must remain at the very heart of our missile defence system. Now, MBDA employs 1,200 people in my constituency and almost 6,000 across the UK. I'm sure colleagues will agree with myself and my honourable friend for Stevenage that MBDA represents the very best in ingenuity, working as a trusted partner throughout Europe and providing the air defence capability we need, as do our allies, to stand up to Russians' unwarranted aggression. So I welcome the Secretary of State's comments at the Farnborough International Air Show earlier this year, where he committed to, and I quote, renewing important partnerships with industry and continuing to push technological boundaries. Yes, I will.
Thank you very much for doing so. He's given way already. Scotland is a tremendous asset in defence. Companies right across the country provide enormous pieces of equipment, such as the aircraft carriers, which were built in Scotland, but we also have many smaller SMEs. We have Raytheon, who provide parts for Tomahawk. We have Thales on the banks of the Clyde. But in Scotland, does the Minister know that there is something of a hostile environment from the Scottish Government towards companies that we need to ramp up, who will need to access finance in order to deliver the large orders that are coming from the MOD. We have seen senior Scottish Government figures boast about the fact that under their watch they would not give money to large companies for warfighting capabilities. It was civilian use only. This is alarming, and we are going to ally with, as well as NATO, with defence companies too. Thank you.
Well, the Honourable Member makes an important point about the importance of the defence sector across all four nations of the United Kingdom. I will continue, if I may, with the Secretary of State's comments at the International Air Show in Farnborough, where he also spoke about the importance of driving prosperity and creating skilled jobs across the country. But defence can't be done on the cheap. We're going to have to put our hands in our pockets. It is an investment, not a cost, and I must urge the Government to reach the 2.5% GDP defence spending target at the earliest opportunity, so that the rogue states causing ongoing geopolitical instability know that their continued unlawful aggression will not and cannot win. So to conclude, Mr Dowd, the threats we face are very real, as are the resourcing, production, capacity and resilience needs. I look forward to further measures from this new government to show its resolve to standing up to Putin, to investing in our defence capability and increasing domestic manufacturing capacity.
Thank you. Chris MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr Dowd. A pleasure as always to serve under your chairmanship. And thank you also to my honourable friend, the member for North Durham. I know how important this subject is, not only for his constituents, but also for mine and many others across the North East. We've heard a number of remarks from the members from Strangford, Stevenage and Bolton West about the importance of manufacturing and industry. And in fact, that's where I will choose to focus my comments this morning. Prior to arriving in this place, and indeed since my election, I've done some work with the Royal United Services Institute in this area. And I'd like to draw members' attention to the conclusion of some work they did a couple of years ago, that a prolonged war will be won ultimately by the country with the strongest industrial base. I think that's a comment on which we could all agree. My honourable friend, the member for Bolton West, also mentioned the September 2024 report from the House of Lords about the importance to pay greater attention to homeland defence. And I think that's really the crux of the opening remarks from my honourable friend, the member for North Durham. The reorientation of defence from expeditionary to homeland defence means that we must rely on our own domestic industry in order to secure our defence. He talked as well of the number of missiles and drones and so on that have been expended in the war in Ukraine. And it's important to think of all of those missiles and drones as machines composed of semiconductors, plastics, metals, ceramics, advanced manufacturing and advanced machining, all of which in a conflict we would be required to produce from our own economy. That House of Lords report to which I previously mentioned also drew attention to the need to generate and maintain mass in a conflict. This is the ability to ensure that our economy can ensure that we can field second and third echelon fighting forces, protect our critical national infrastructure and safeguard lines of communication to frontline troops. Now, I know that government is considering integrated air missile defences in the forthcoming Strategic Defence Review, and I'm pleased that this debate will, and my honourable friend's opening remarks, will raise the profile of that. But I do hope that review will also look at how we strengthen our homeland security, and particularly with the threat from Putin, we need to consider how we will grow our industrial base. Now, fortunately, we're starting in a reasonably strong position. Our defence industry is a global leader, and this is why I believe government has included defence as one of the 8 growth sectors in our modern industrial strategy, Invest 2025. But we need to invest further in capabilities that will deter and defeat future threats. And that will rely beyond our defence industry on our wider foundation industries. And I'd like to talk a bit about the foundation industries and their role. So first of all, I welcome the government's protection of the coherent semiconductor plant in the constituency of my honourable friend, the member for Newton Aycliffe and Spennymoor. But we can think of other examples, such as the CF fertiliser plant in Billingham in my constituency, which produced ammonia for explosives for over 100 years, but closed last year due to an uncompetitive business environment in the UK. In the steel industry, we talk a lot about big steel centres such as Port Talbot and Scunthorpe, but a number of years ago we lost our only electrical steels capability with almost without a murmur. And I think there is a wider issue here in Europe as well. Plastics demand in Europe grew by over 6% last year, but production in Europe declined by 3%. In technical ceramics, essential for all of our missile defence systems, the ceramics industry is also struggling from high and uncompetitive energy prices. The Defence Select Committee report of earlier this year, Ready for War, identified some serious deficiencies also in our defence procurement practices, with the relationship between the MOD and suppliers not anywhere close to where it needs to be. The report identified a pressing need to strengthen domestic production across the board, and if supported by a positive investment environment and a pipeline of projects, we know that the UK economy possesses a range of, in my sector that I worked in, domestic steel producers and suppliers in other areas as well, that could produce these key components. And I think we have a great opportunity here with the combination of the defence industrial strategy, our steel strategy produced in the spring, and of course our modern industrial strategy, in order to set the scene to create the environment for private sector investment that will enable us to strengthen these capabilities. Finally, I'd like to draw the members' attention to the words of former NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg. I think he characterised this entire debate very appropriately when he said, without industry, there is no defence, no deterrence and no security.
Thank you. Calvin Bailey.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr Dowd, and I thank my honourable friend, the member for North Durham, for bringing about this critical debate. In 1988, the Sunday Times published a formative exposition of the integrated air defence system which protected the UK at the time, an article I managed to find with the aid of the library, called "Can the RAF Defend Us?" And it gave a very detailed analysis of the system that was in place at the time, some parts of which hadn't changed since 1938. And it spoke of how an investment of about £10 billion worth of combined programmes would address this. And I enjoyed reminding myself, whilst reading the article, of the places that were commissioned back then and that I finally got to serve in the early 2000s. The reason for bringing this up is, just like then, now we need a clear understanding of where we are, and to understand the degradation in our services since the 2010 Strategic Defence and Security Review. And this, critically, needs to be understood. Defence has three outputs: policy, capability, and operations. And in terms of where we are now, we must convince ourselves of the need to do some of the things which my right honourable friend for North Durham spoke about so eloquently earlier. In terms of policy first, we must recognise that that our security problem is inherently a European one. The European Sky Shield system or design is fundamental to this, and it's critical that we enhance and recover some of our relationships with our European partners, and we must remain NATO first. We must recognise that we will not stand alone, and the solution to our problems and funding must have a European bent. And I asked the Minister, and I urged the Minister to do as my other right honourable friend discussed, to enhance our European relationships, specifically in terms of access to funding and partnership with our European partners. I note in the article as well that there was a clear recognition that our army was inherently European and European-based. It is largely pointless having tanks on Salisbury Plain when the threat is elsewhere. And I do wonder whether now is the time to give reconsideration to where some of our army is based, because having a deployed army or an army that contributes to a security problem will also need an air defence underneath it, above it, and we need to give a consideration to the service which at present is prime in delivering parts of our integrated air defence system. I also welcome the discussions about Type 45. It's imperative that we understand that the Royal Navy has a part to play in our air defences, and that Type 45s are not there just for the protection of the carrier, but are also fundamental to ensuring the long sea track. But policy as well also we must recognise that essential to whatever solutions that we come about, we must make sure that we are in the grey zone right now. The grey zone is, we aren't talking, defence is about deterrence. It's fundamental that we maintain a posture which deters our enemy. But we must understand that that logic has already started. They have already started to encroach some of the fundamental parts of our deterrence, including damaging the rule-based international order. And one of the things that I would urge the Minister to take back to the Department is a discussion about policy, our deterrence policy that goes around our integrated air defence, something which is discussed incredibly well in the 1988 article. Capability then. And I do not wish to politicise this, to politicise these discussions, but in the way that we reflect now openly about the damage that was done to our industries by the 1957 Defence Review, we must have an honest discussion about the impact of the 2010 SDR. Critically, we must recognise what happens when we take capability holidays and how these create long and lasting impacts in our capabilities. This is why we are in the position that we're in now. And some of the capabilities that were mentioned in the opening speech aren't here because we didn't support the industries that were enabled for building them. And a recovery of our industrial base is essential for this. But what I'd also say is that readiness is about availability, capability and sustainability. And the greatest damage that has been done to our defence enterprise is our ability to sustain a response. We must have industry that is capable of building the stocks and sustaining the stocks necessary to counter mass. Finally, on operations, we have circa 10,000 people deployed on 250 operations worldwide at the moment. And we were told at the Defence Select Committee the other day that we have about 100,000 personnel fit to fight. For that force to be sustainable, not even using harmony, which is quite complex to work out, that is a force of 30,000 people that are committed today to operations. It's also not unreasonable to assume that an amount of our forces above this are on readiness, and they should also be on a ratio of 3 to 1 or greater. So something upwards of 30% of our fighting force is currently deployed sustainably now. And I ask the Minister to foster an honest discussion within the Department whether that is affordable and sustainable, because we need our forces at home or on European soil training and getting ready for the coming fight, and we cannot erode our defence enterprise by doing what may be considered profligate operations that don't contribute to our future security.
On that point.
Absolutely.
I thank my honourable friend, and he is making a very thought-provoking speech. In an increasingly volatile world where new global threats are constantly emerging, we must ensure that we're at the very cutting edge of technology. That's why I was pleased to see recent progress on the new air defence laser, equipping RAF pilots with high tech to defeat missile threats. Does my honourable friend agree that we must ensure steps are taken to have us at the very cutting edge of innovation to enhance our air and missile defence capabilities?
I thank my honourable friend for his very eloquent and apposite intervention, and I agree with him that technology, our ability to respond and counter mass, fundamentally requires us to have technology. And I think, to align it with the point that I was making, it is also essential that we have people trained and ready to use the technology. And that is why the size and mass of our deployments is critical, because if we don't allow our forces to train and to recover adequately, then they won't be able to exercise and use and be ready to use those technologies as they come online. So to finish then, I urge the Minister for a number of honest discussions, which I've made clear already, particularly about the deployments, but I would also ask her to take a look at the disparity in some of the policies that we are using when our forces are deployed, in particular those that impact our weapons carriage hours. There is a significant disparity between the policies that we use to sustain our stocks, and an alignment with NATO and certainly with the US would bring significant cost savings and reductions, and requirements for the size of our stockpiles, and that is something that I think our shadow Defence Secretary may be able to bring out based on his past experiences and understanding. So finally, I would just like again to thank my right honourable friend, the member for North Durham, for bringing about this debate. I welcome the government's recent announcement on the removal of the costly and antiquated systems as we did last week. I am hopeful for the SDR, and I'm very grateful for a government that values the service of our armed forces.
Yeah. Thank you. Ian Room.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's a great pleasure to serve under your chairmanship for the very first time in my contribution to a Westminster Hall debate. So I thank the honourable member for Durham North for securing this very important debate today on the UK's air defence systems. Contributions from all honourable members across the House have provided an enlightening and insightful contributions to this topic, and I thank them for these contributions today. I think we're all aware of the gravity of this topic, given recent events. Our armed forces play a vital role in defending the UK, and please can I echo what's been said about our armed forces here today and our defence systems. The last government oversaw an ongoing real terms decline in defence spending, with a lasting impact on our armed forces, which the former Secretary of State for Defence, Ben Wallace, described as hollowed out and underfunded in January of last year. With serious dangers around the world, the war in Ukraine, the comments of some of the incoming Trump administration, and conflict in the Middle East, it is now more essential than ever that the UK invests in a safe future for our children and grandchildren. We all have seen the news coverage showing the devastating effects that long-range aerial attacks can have on civilians, and the emergence of new hypersonic missiles poses a major strategic challenge. The Liberal Democrats welcome the news that the Prime Minister has given the green light to the Tempest project in collaboration with Japan and Italy. Just last week, the Deputy Chief of Defence Staff, Lieutenant General Rob McGowan, to our Defence Select Committee, described the Global Combat Air Programme, GCAP, as absolutely central to the UK's defence industrial base, from combat air and jet engine to missile sector capability. Working alongside our allies is essential, and we look forward to seeing how this venture opens new doors to further cooperation. The UK remains independently protected by the Royal Air Force Quick Reaction Alert Force, by Sky Cyber surface-to-air capability, and by air defence missiles launched from the Royal Navy's surface fleet. However, the last few years have changed the security landscape dramatically. For the UK to remain secure, the Liberal Democrats believe we need a comprehensive security and defence agreement with the European Union. The European Sky Shield initiative now has 21 countries involved, and the UK signed a letter of intent in 2022 indicating it would also take part. I was heartened to see that the recent Anglo-German Trinity House Defence Agreement also indicated we would work more closely together on air defence. The last government lacked this cooperation and pragmatic approach to Europe, potentially jeopardising the security interests of the UK for political posturing over our relationship with European allies. By showing leadership on developing new defence technologies, equipment systems and training programmes with our neighbours, the UK can achieve better results and enhance our shared security. The Global Combat Air Programme will contribute to our armed forces' readiness and the future of this country's aerial defence. However, this is a long-term project. Our question should be, what policy moves can we also make in the near to medium term to show both allies and adversaries that we are serious? For example, in the midst of the Strategic Defence Review, how does reaffirming the government's support for GCAP fit with the review's work? Is it now safeguarded, regardless of the SDR's other findings? I join colleagues from across the Chamber today by expressing my concern for the state of procurement in the armed forces. Over one-third of defence contracts under the last government were awarded uncompetitively. One of the key priorities must be addressing this persistent and pressing issue which has plagued successive governments for too long. Inefficiencies and missed opportunities have hampered our ability to ensure that our armed forces are well equipped, well supported and well prepared for the evolving security challenges of any future conflict. I believe in a sustained effort to fix these problems, including integrated defence procurement into a comprehensive industrial strategy. We must create a reliable long-term pipeline of equipment procurement, giving our armed forces the tools they need, while supporting the UK's manufacturing and innovation sectors.
Will my right honourable friend give way?
I will.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way and thank the right honourable member for North Durham for securing this today's debate. Leonardo is a key player in our defence industry and employer in my constituency of Yeovil. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that Leonardo, being the sole remaining bidder in the next stage in the procurement process for the new medium helicopter, represents an important step in moving towards supporting the UK's manufacturing and innovation sectors?
Well, I'm sure the Minister heard what my right honourable friend said. Oh, sorry, my honourable friend. Right. Likewise, the introduction of flexibility in defence capital spending would mean we can focus on meeting critical in-service dates rather than simply hitting financial deadlines. Fixing defence procurement will ensure that our armed forces remain modern, capable and ready to protect us in an ever-changing world. In our lifetimes, a fresh approach has never been more essential. I would like to mention SEA from my constituency in North Devon, who won a £135 million contract to supply state-of-the-art defensive countermeasure systems to the Royal Navy. Groundbreaking technology that will also likely be deployed via export to surface fleets across a number of this country's allies. We also welcome the Secretary of State for Defence's ambition to increase the defence spending to 2.5% of GDP. However, the government has not issued a timetable to do this, and we need clear, tangible plans outlining how this target will be achieved in practice. It is critical that the Ministry of Defence has certainty about its future funding to be able to plan effectively. Can the Minister now provide more clarity on the measures the government intends to take to increase the defence budget and ensure long-term financial security for the MOD? Finally, by taking action now, Mr Chair, we prevent future generations from facing the need to allocate 3%, 4% or even 5% of GDP to address challenges like air defence that could have been anticipated and managed earlier. This is about building lasting resilience and protecting our nation for the long term. A coordinated approach across government is essential. Mr Chairman, many members have put some very important strategic defence questions to the Minister today, and I, for one, look forward to the replies given after I've finished. Thank you.
a great pleasure to serve under your chairmanship as ever, and my strong congratulations to the Honourable Gentleman for Durham North. This is an extremely timely debate. He spoke very well. In fact, all colleagues, I think, have contributed very thoughtful speeches on what is an important subject, obviously because of what's happening in Ukraine, also because of what we've seen in the Red Sea, and in particular in Israel, with many now saying that we should adopt some form of Iron Dome. So this is a debate which very timely indeed, and I'm grateful for it. I would just echo the comments of my neighbour in West Suffolk and also the Honourable Gentleman for Durham North about asking if the Minister will update us on the overnight story about these drones that appeared to fly over US VF bases in Suffolk indeed and Norfolk, and apparently the deployment of the Ninja and AUKUS system, the different AUKUS, this is ORCUS, not the defence pact with our partners. It'd be good to have an update on to what extent that was used. But I think actually a key point was made by the Honourable Gentleman for Stevenage, which is I launched something called the integrated procurement model back in February, because he's absolutely right. It's not a pun, you can't look at issues around missile defence in silos, because you have to take the joined-up approach, multi-domain, particularly space. I strongly agree with him. That will be a decisive factor in the early stages of something which we hope never happens, which is existential war in the future. And we need to be interoperable with allies, and the systems that we procure need to be integrated across all the domains of our defence posture. But in particular, we do still need to consider at a domain level. My last visit to an army base before the election was called, it was a week before, was to Thorney Island on the south coast. Obviously, I didn't know it was a week before the election was called, it's fair to say. To the 7th Air Defence Group, who it was interesting to remark, they used to be regarded as quite obscure, but of course, because they are our GBAD unit, found themselves at the heart of the future debate on defence. When I visited there, I was clear that we would be ordering significant new levels of GBAD, including LMM for short range, but also land sceptre units, and I hope that the Minister can confirm those orders are continuing under the new government and will be scaled up, because clearly, as all colleagues have said, we do need significantly more scale than that which we currently have because of the changing threat. On the air domain, I think that it is actually currently our backbone in many ways to rely on the Typhoon. And the Honourable Gentleman for North Devon made a very good point, which is GCAP, which I do support, is nevertheless something which is way off into the future in the 2030s. What is going to happen to boost lethality in the near term? So I think the Minister, it'd be good if she could update us on, for example, the E-scan radar with Typhoon, which will significantly increase its capability. It has been intercepting drones and missiles in the Middle East. It remains the backbone of our air defence, and we must ensure that it is operating at the most capable level that it can achieve. But I'm particularly concerned on the maritime threat issues. When we talk about Ukraine, Mr. Dow, we are talking about not being deployed in the theatre, but supporting them through the supply of ordnance, whereas in the naval situation, it was our own ships that were threatened, our own personnel, British sailors on board those ships. The Houthis, we understand, it's in the public domain, have obtained ballistic missiles from Iran, possibly other actors. This is a very serious threat. It may be that they don't yet have the fullest capability, but a very worrying report this week that they are sending troops to support Russia in exchange for targeting information. Now, that is a very serious development in my view. And so I believe, given the ballistic threat, given that it is true, current, as I understand, Sea Sceptre cannot intercept in the terminal phase, that we do need to rapidly accelerate as far as we are able to the evolution upgrade, because I think that would give us a anti-ballistic capability. But we may even have to consider an urgent operational requirement, for example, for the SM-3, which is a US missile that they have on the Arleigh Burke, which can intercept ballistic threats, which I believe could go in our Mark 41 launchers when our Type 26 and Type 31 start entering the sea. We're going to have to think like this because the threat is evolving so fast. And in fact, it's technology which I feel most strongly is where we can enhance our forces. The chairman of the Select Committee spoke about laser. When I was presented with Dragonfire, I thought, wow, if we can get this capability into service as fast as possible, the crucial point is here may be a way, and obviously it's experimental up to a point, here may be a way to intercept drones without denuding our missile stockpile. That is incredibly significant. And the other directed energy weapon we were looking at was the radio frequency one. I also saw that in Thorney Island. This is actually not an electronic warfare system. It is a kinetic strike from sound waves that can take out multiple drones at once for something like 10p a shot. At the moment, relatively limited range, but I hope the Minister can confirm that the government will be pursuing these directed energy weapons because, you know, if we go at them hard and fast and we deliver them into the arms of our forces quicker than other nations, we will not only boost our lethality and capability, we will boost our defence industry. And so that's why it's not just the link with industry that matters, it's the link with DSTL, our brilliant scientists, and creating that integrated procurement system that I wanted, which the Honourable Gentleman for North Devon, I'm pleased, was talking about, that enables us to develop really quickly and remain at the cutting edge. But obviously, one key issue, as all colleagues I think have said, if we want to procure these weapons, these systems, these capabilities, they cost money. And we need to commit to 2.5%. Our position was by 2030. Now, we can go back to the 2010s, as the Honourable Gentleman for, I think it's Leighton and Wanstead did. And he knows I'm a great fan. He showed me around the cockpit of an A400, and I was very grateful. He's got huge expertise from his time in service. But I have to be clear, you know, the Labour Party would have cut defence by 25% in 2010 had they won the election. The financial position then was incredibly bleak. What we now have to do is put the past behind us when it was a long-term decline. Well, the Honourable Lady Minister is chuntering, but the fact is defence spending fell under us, it fell under Labour, because it was falling around the world since the end of the Cold War, because we all thought peace was upon us. And what we all have to do in defence is adjust to the threat picture as we see it. And I think the crucial point is this. When we announced our funding pathway to 2.5% in April, the Prime Minister announced it in Germany, it would have included reducing the civil service back to its pre-pandemic size to pay for it. That's actually not a particularly ambitious target, but the number one priority of that extra spending would have been replenishment and rearmament. By replenishment, we mean replacing the arms we've given to Ukraine, and by rearmament, replacing our technological warfighting capabilities. So, for example, the evolution system for Sea Viper as an absolute priority. But if you have a multi-year funding path in the MOD, you can procure at scale and at pace. If we have one-off, one-year adjustments, even if it's £2.9 billion, it will not enable the procurement at scale and pace that we require. That is a fact. And, you know, it was the Honourable Member for Stockton North, actually, he made a very good point. If you go back to the Select Committee appearance of the Secretary of State, we had Rob McGowan, General McGowan, Milcap, saying we need always-on production. That's what a multi-year settlement gives you. Wars are fought, ultimately, on industrial capability. I'm going to make two more points, Mr Dowd. In terms of our allies, an excellent point was made about Diamond, an initiative which I launched. This is about actually having tests like we have in the Outer Hebrides for cruise missiles with the Navy for missile defence. We need to train, be interoperable as NATO in Europe in these capabilities, and also look at multilateral procurement so that we as a continent are buying together to leverage economies of scale. But my final point really, and I think this is absolutely crucial, is about the deterrent. Now, the Honourable Member for North Durham said at the beginning this is about the conventional air defence. We have to be absolutely clear. When Putin starts talking about an ICBM being used, he ain't going to not use it because we have missile defence. The thing that's going to stop him from using it is fear of second strike from our ballistic missiles. Now, we hope it would never happen. This is it is the extreme response to the extreme threat. But the fact is, people talk about neglecting homeland security. We've had a submarine continuously at sea since 1969 with the most extraordinary lethality aboard it, quite unimaginable in the scale of what it can do. And it is still absolutely at the technological cutting edge. And my point is this, we mustn't take it for granted. It must still be the cornerstone of the SDR. It is our number one defence. It is ultimately the reason why countries will not, I believe, not be tempted to launch conventional missile attacks. After all, if you attack London with conventional missiles, that is a declaration of war. That is Article 5, and a country doing that would have to be prepared to risk a nuclear response, ultimately. That is what would be at stake. That is not to say, for one moment, Mr Dowd, we should not be considering how we upgrade our air defence. I totally agree with everyone who said spoken about the importance of this. But in the SDR, the nuclear deterrent should still be the #1 priority because it is the fundamental way we defend ourselves. And that means, again, a multi-year funding settlement so that we can invest in infrastructure and the expensive capabilities to come with it. It's had some excellent speeches. Mr Dowd, the Honourable Gentleman for Bolton West spoke about the need to get to 2.5% as soon as possible. We strongly agree with him on this side. We hope the Minister will still be pushing for that.
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr Dowd. And can I begin by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for North Durham, for obtaining this debate and for making such a superb contribution to it, very knowledgeable and very incisive. And he ought to be congratulated for that. I agree with the honourable gentleman from South Suffolk about one thing, and that is the quality of this debate has been superb, with excellent contributions from all sides, knowledgeable contributions. I want to answer one or two questions that I was specifically asked before getting on to the meat of what I want to say. The honourable gentleman for West Suffolk had an important point to make about concerns in his constituency, which contains Lakenheath and Milden Hall, and he also made reference to a site nearby that's where developments are worrying local people, and he's reflecting that in his contribution today. First of all, as far as I'm aware, we don't have concerns about that development in MOD, but I fully acknowledge that his constituents do, and I'm more than happy to offer in the meeting that he sought in order that I can understand more fully the concerns that have been raised with him, and that we can engage to make sure that he's reassured to the extent that that is an accurate thing for him to be. A number of honourable members from across the chamber have talked about the commitment to 2.5%, and I just want to make it clear that that is our commitment. And the honourable gentleman from South Suffolk tries to make sure that I don't resort to saying that the last time that the country spent 2.5% on defence was at the time of the last Labour government, but I've disappointed him. That is in fact accurate. I can understand why the party that's just left office after 14 years doesn't necessarily want to talk about all aspects of its record, but nonetheless the record is there. We are committed to setting a path to 2.5% in the spring. As the honourable gentleman and members around the House know, the Strategic Defence Review will be reporting in the spring, and it's at that point when we have a full strategic sense of what we ought to be spending the money that we're going to be committing on in order to meet the current threats, rather than operating on the basis of an industrial strategy and a defence and security review. Even with its refresh, it didn't take into... I will when I finish my sentence. Even with its refresh, did not take into account what was happening with Ukraine. Then I think that at that point we'll be in a position to know very clearly what it is that we ought to be spending those increased resources on. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm very grateful, and I would just say this. Last week, the government announced very significant cuts to defence capability without waiting for the SDR. So why do they have to wait for the SDR to realise, which they will know no matter how many SDRs they undertake, that we need to go to 2.5% to replenish our munitions as a matter of urgency?
Last week, the Secretary of State made a statement that dealt with withdrawing 6 capabilities. It would in fact save some money, £150 million over 2 years and £500 million over 5 years. But the primary purpose of that was so that we don't continue to spend money on capability that isn't actually going to provide modern defence. And it's a rationalisation. It's fairly clear to see with some of those announcements that it was just necessary to get on and make the decision. But the honourable gentleman will see in the new year that there will be a path set out to 2.5% in the spring, along with the SDR, and I think that's the right way of doing it. But we are committed to it, and we will get there. I just wanted to make the point I think that also deals with the point that the Honourable Gentleman for Strangford and the Honourable Gentleman for East Londonderry, who's no longer in his place, in his intervention made about getting to 2.5%. I think it's been a timely and excellent debate across the Chamber, and I think if the Honourable Gentleman for North Durham's aim was to show that there's support around the House, then I think he's succeeded. And I think it will be very clear to anybody reading the debate that there isn't a real distinction between the concerns that we all have across parties about this. And as we were reminded last week by Russia's reckless and escalatory use of an intermediate-range ballistic missile, and this has been mentioned not only by my honourable friend but by a number of other honourable members in their speeches, the global air and missile threat is advancing, it's proliferating and converging. And so given this increasingly volatile and contested threat environment, we have to ensure that we have the capability and capacity to counter threats in the most appropriate way. And so in this uncertain future, and as the Honourable Gentleman for South Suffolk said, deterrence not only of the nuclear kind, but will form the main line of defence. So we've got to ensure that we provide the right level of deterrence through the joint efforts of land, sea and air power. And to do this, we've got to consider properly the range of threats from the low-cost drones we see affecting the UK today to the strategic long-range weapons that Russia threatens to use. It might be an opportune moment for me to deal with the points that a number of members made about the drone situation. Obviously, we're aware of recent reports of drones flying, not only in the Honourable Gentleman's constituency, but in other places. Protection of our personnel and bases is, of course, our highest priority. We do employ multi-layered and credible force protection measures. I'm not going to start saying here precisely what has been employed and where, but for security reasons I won't go into specifics. But the Chamber can be assured that we are taking steps and we are aware of what's going on and doing our best to deal with it. The House will also be aware that the Civil Aviation Authority has protection through aerodromes in the UK are protected under the Air Navigation Order by uncrewed air system flight restriction zones, and that we will be making sure that anybody that we manage to catch for engaging in this behaviour is shown the full force of the law for their illegal activities. That's about all I can say at present, but obviously the Chamber wouldn't expect me to go into too many details, but we are fully dealing with this matter. As the Honourable Gentleman said in his remarks, our geography does make the threats faced by the UK different to that of many of our allies, and so therefore solutions preferred by some won't necessarily be suitable to us. But our geography shouldn't make us complacent, and doesn't. We've got to continue to look at how the UK can meet her own NATO commitments, provide defence and deterrence and protect the UK homeland. But we must also ensure we become increasingly interoperable with our NATO allies. So let me be clear that though the threat is evolving, the UK isn't defenceless. We have a very broad range of capabilities contributing towards our integrated air and missile defence approach. And as the Honourable Gentleman and the Honourable Gentleman for South Suffolk also said, we've got Typhoon aircraft on alert 24 hours a day. We have the Navy has proved the effectiveness of Type 45 against various air threats. So whilst it's right that we don't predetermine the outcome of the Strategic Defence Review, the Chamber can be very clear that it's a key part of the Strategic Defence Review to look at how we can deal with preparedness against air and missile threats. However, that isn't to say, and it would be wrong to suggest, therefore, that means that the government is not actually taking any action. We've recognised the vital importance of integrated air and missile defence. which is why we're not just passively reviewing our own capabilities, we're actively leading the way internationally with initiatives such as Diamond, which the Honourable Gentleman did indeed initiate during his time in office, which aims to improve air defence integration across Europe, boost interoperability, strengthen NATO, integrated air and missile defence, all very well as all procuring different missiles. If they don't work together, one ends up with holes and gaps. And there's a good argument for making sure that we can join up whatever systems there are to boost overall defence for Europe. And that, of course, is what Diamond seeks to do. And that is all going on now. And it should put it in a better position to understand how to go forward and spend the money that we're going to be spending wisely and on the right things, not on the wrong things. The Secretary of State obviously announced this at the NATO Defence Ministers last month, that the UK is going to lead on some of that work. And the UK has also launched the NATO Multinational Procurement Initiative on defensive and offensive missile capabilities to mobilise the Euro-Atlantic defence industry in support of Ukraine. And we still have to support Ukraine, double down on supporting Ukraine, make sure we boost them as best we can to defend their country against the appalling aggression that they're facing. And boosting industrial capacity is another key part of the debate that we've had today. And I think that a certainty in our strategic way forward and a boost in our the money that we're going to be spending, and those present will recall that at the budget just passed, we did get an extra £2.9 billion for defence over the next year. There's no way in which all government departments will have been as happy with the settlement that they got from the Treasury as defence is, and so that's a down payment on the support that we need. But we have to do more to improve cooperation in Europe. We're boosting bilateral engagement, for example. Last month, the UK and Germany signed the landmark Trinity House Agreement, committed to improve and enhance bilateral defence cooperation, and with a shared objective to sustain effective deterrence against would-be aggressors by sharing plans on integration of capabilities, by taking more steps together to procure the right kind of equipment, supporting implementation of NATO-agreed common standards, and ultimately working towards the vision of a peaceful and stable Euro-Atlantic area by having sufficient deterrence there to prevent any aggression. And obviously we also work closely with France, where cooperation in the field of defence capability and equipment is a vital pillar of the Lancaster House Treaty. And we intend to try and make sure that that gets a boost and works better and faster towards improving our defence cooperation in areas such as IMAD. We have a substantial range of equipment and capabilities across all domains, and we continue to work closely with the French and the Germans. One of my honourable friends, I can't quite recall which one it was, suggested that we needed to focus much more also on boosting our relationship with Europe, with the EU, and that we are also doing. And I just want
to give the opportunity for the sponsor to wind up, but if you've got a minute left.
Oh, okay. All the screens are showing different times, but I'm perfectly happy on that basis, Mr. Dowd, to conclude my remarks there.
Thank you, Mr. Dowd. Actually, I think it's appropriate that the time was used by the Minister, because getting the reassurances then was extremely important and is what we all wanted to hear. And I'm particularly pleased that the Minister recognised that the purpose of this debate was in order to demonstrate the support there is across the House and the knowledge that there is about this important subject and set of of threats, and I particularly welcome the Minister saying that a key part of the SDR will be to look at preparedness against air and missile threats. I just wanted to reassure the Shadow Secretary of State for Defence that any concerns he's got about support for the nuclear deterrent, he doesn't need to have those concerns. I've spent my entire political life, it's been a recurring theme, getting stuck into the arguments for renewal and sustainment of the nuclear deterrent. It's part of my political brand, so I'm sure we can have that debate at another time. And I just wanted to thank all the honourable members that have contributed. There were important contributions from members who have an industrial interest in this in their constituencies, whether that's Thales or MBDA. We have some excellent technologies around the country that can contribute to it, and a very insightful contribution from the member from Stockton North about wider industrial concerns, and another very insightful contribution from the honourable and gallant member for Leighton and Wanstead based on his own service in the armed forces. I give way.
We'll leave the